Alright, so I thought I'd do a little update video on the XF 35mm F1.4 versus the XF 33mm F1.4. I made this video a few years ago already, but because YouTube moves so fast and you guys are too lazy to scroll down my videos a few years ago, and you're always asking me, which one should I get? I just thought, you know what? I'm gonna do you guys a favor and make more content and do more work because, I have no life. I'm here to please you guys. And in today's video, we're gonna compare these two lenses together. I'm gonna share with you guys my experience with these two lenses. So let's just get started with the build quality. The 35mm is smaller, lighter, making it easier to carry around. The 35mm also has a 52mm filter thread, whereas the larger brother, the 33mm, has a 58mm filter thread. Although I think the weight of the XF 33mm is still light in the grand scheme of things, comparing this to the 35 makes the 33mm feel like a fat bastard, like the one you see in Austin Powers 3.
I can't stop eating!
And now you can just see how big the 33 is compared to this tiny little 35 right here. It feels significantly weightier than this. This feels like nothing, like freaking nothing. It's just so pleasant to carry this around versus this lens right here. However, the 33mm is weather sealed, something that the 35 is not, and the XF33 also has linear motors inside, which can be very useful for folks who values decent autofocusing. More on autofocusing later. The 35mm in full frame equivalent is around 52.5mm, and the 33 is 49.5mm if you want to be a little bit more technical. Now let's move on to the image quality. So let's talk about the objective here first. The 33mm is much sharper than the 35 wide open in the center. Now as you can see in this shot of the Pikachu, the 33mm seems to have more details around the nose area, whereas the 35mm around the same area starts losing its detail. It doesn't hold up. However, once you stop down the 35mm to f5.6, it does a respectable job sharpening up in the center. But once you go further out, you're gonna see that the 35mm is just a smidge softer. Now that we got that out of the way, let's just talk about the subjectivity of image quality. Some people may like the soft look that the 35mm produces, and some may like that cleaner sharpness that you get from the 33mm. There are days where I prefer the soft look, and there are days where I just want things to look sharp and clinical. So I'm not going to say one is better than the other. It just comes down to personal preference. Now, in my unscientific shot comparison between the two lenses with the Pikachu, I saw nothing different when I shot it as is. I had the X-T5 on the tripod and I just switched out lenses, and the only way you'll notice a difference is one looks tighter than the other. But if we were to take both images with no zooming, just frame by frame, they look pretty similar. It's not until you start zooming in is when you see that the 33mm is way sharper than the 35mm. But again, if this was just frame by frame, like what I'm doing right now, just like this, I don't think you guys could tell a difference. In my opinion, the bokeh in this unscientific image comparison between the two lenses showed me that they look the same, at least on my eyes anyways. But doing these Pikachu comparison shots does not tell the whole story. When I was using the 35 around Spain, I did notice that softness issues in my photos. I see a lot more chromatic aberrations. I also see more of this softness, this glow, this halation look in the center of the image as well. The 33mm does not suffer the same fate. It performs very well on the X-T5. You won't see the image breakdown or anything like that. It's quite the performer on the 40 megapixel sensor. Again, some will say that the 35mm has that character that people love about this lens, and some people have said that the 33mm just looks too boring and it has that clinical look, and sometimes it feels a bit stale. And again, this is all depending on your photography and what you are looking for in your photos. Do you prefer the modern clinical look, or do you prefer a look with some fun, unique characteristics? The choice is ultimately up to you. Now let's move on to the autofocus. For the autofocus, the winner is obviously the 33mm for having the linear motors. AF tracking is way better on the 33mm than it is with the 35. The 35mm feels unsure of itself when tracking human subjects. I have no issues using both these lenses in single point AF because both can get the job done. For video autofocusing, I left the tracking sensitivity and the autofocusing speed down in the middle, like it was straight out of the box. So you get an idea of what the autofocusing would look like on both lenses. And doing this walking test, I find that the 33mm is smoother when it comes to autofocus, whereas the 35mm does this thing where it needs to stop, gather itself, and then focus again. So again, the 35mm is old and it's unsure about itself. Okay, so let's talk about my experience and my time using both lenses. Shooting with a 35mm on the X-T5 reminded me of how special this lens is. Sure, the 40 megapixel amplifies its flaws, its softness, but I still think it looks good. I still think it has a unique charm and character even on the X-T5. I enjoy how lightweight this lens is compared to the 33mm. So this came in handy for me when I went on that weekend trip to Spain. I was walking around with the X-T5 and the 35mm and there was no hand fatigue. I noticed that I was holding this camera for the entire day, whereas with the X-T5 and the 33mm, there will be a point where the hand fatigue will creep in, or I would just get annoyed and I would just have to put the camera back. I would just have to put the camera and the lens away in the camera bag. Now, when I look back at my catalog, some of my favorite shots were taken on this lens right here, the 35mm. I was able to produce some amazing images with it, and when I know that I'm going to get some bangers, I get more excited, and then that excitement just boosts my creativity and it just gets me in the zone, and it just helps me produce better images. So the XF35mm is very inspiring in that sense. However, I can't use this lens all the time, or I just get like super bored. This lens is full of character. It has some interesting bokeh at times. It adds a certain charm to my images. And on certain days, I may like it, and on other days, I may not. And this is where the XF33mm F1.4 comes in right here. The sharpness, the clinical look. When I want a palette cleanser from the 35mm, I choose the 33mm. And some people may call this lens quite boring, but I disagree. I still have fun with this lens. I still get some amazing shots with this lens. And sometimes I enjoy seeing the finer details when I zoom in. It makes me feel like I don't have onset glaucoma. I also enjoy the autofocusing from this lens. It's much quicker, it's more reliable than the 35mm, and I also like the weather sealing as well. But the XF33mm does come in at a hefty price. You can get a XF35mm on the used market anywhere from like $200 to $400, or you can get a 33mm lens brand new for $899. So the 35mm I find is still usable on the 40 megapixel sensor, but if you're someone who can't stand softness, that needs that center sharpness to be sharp, go for the 33mm. The 35mm is still a gorgeous lens on the 26 megapixel sensor, and that's not going to change. If you want something a bit more fun, more unique, and full of character, the 35mm is the way to go. The 33mm is a bit more clinical compared to the 35, but I still think it produces some great looking image. The autofocusing is great. The weather resistant is great to have for those unfavorable weather conditions. And the size and the weight can be a deterrent for some, but it all makes up for it in image quality. Both lenses are great and both lenses have its pros and cons. If I were to pick just one lens for the X-T5, I would probably pick the 33mm just because it can resolve that 40 megapixel sensor. But however, if I didn't have the 40 megapixel sensor, I think I'm going to go with this lens just because it's so tiny, it's so small, it's so fun to use. And I'm really considering whether or not I should pick this lens up just to have in my kit for when I travel. And then I can leave the 33mm at home and just use the 35 for fun stuff like travel, lifestyle shit that I normally take, because I still like the look that it gives even on the 40 megapixel sensor. But there you have it, folks. What is your take on this? Which lens would you rather have? Take the 33mm or the 35mm? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're interested, I'll leave the links to these lenses in the description. And consider subscribing for more Fujifilm content. And thanks so much.